Stadia is the future of video games. Yeah, I just said that. In case you want to hear it again, Stadia is the future of video games. Actually, I don't mean the real Stadia. It's long dead. Google will never revive it, probably. They got pretty burned with their one foray into the gaming industry. But I believe the Stadia method of business, the way they deliver games to you and I, is going to be the future of video games for all of the three companies, the big companies left over, Xbox or Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo. So I want to get into this. And to really actually get into this, we're going to have to look at why Stadia failed. And I'm going to take you down memory lane a little bit to establish some trends and some credibility to my thesis. But also, we're going to look at some current trends in video games. And then I'm going to put it all together at the end. So stick with me, because it will come together in the end and it will make sense in the end. So before we begin, I want to just say that I'm a data analyst and I work in the IT industry. So I'm going to be using some of my data analysis skills and some of my IT industry knowledge. Now, I'm not in the gaming industry in particular, but in the IT industry overall. Let's go down memory lane a little bit, and let's talk about 1983 and the video game crash. So in 1983, of course, we all know that the video game industry crashed, and a lot of people attribute this to the game E.T., which was a terrible game. I'm not going to lie. But it wasn't what caused the crash. I mean, let's face it. One game could not cause an entire industry to crumble. Well, it was symptomatic of what the industry's problems were, though. And what I mean by that, basically, Atari, especially Atari, was pumping out games like crazy, just getting them on the shelves. And they were doing it with high expectations for these games, whether they were original games, whether they were ports of arcade games. All in all, though, these games were terrible. They were awful. They did not live up to the hype. Even the box art. And I'm going to give you an example here. So, look at this box art. Do you think that this box art really is a good depiction of this game? And yeah, just so you know, that black square, that is your character. I mean, come on. No amount of imagination is going to make that box art and that game come together. I don't care who you are. So people got tired of it. They got tired of buying crap. And who can blame them? I don't blame them. So they started taking their games back. They stopped buying them altogether. And basically the industry crumbled. Because all of a sudden, Atari had mountains of video games and nobody to buy them. They already paid for the development. They already paid for the cartridge production, and nobody was buying their stuff. Stores were sending it back in crates. Now, we all know that Nintendo came along a few years later, in 1985. They basically saved the industry. So how did Nintendo do it? Well, they reduced expectations. They had pixelated box art. They made better games, much better games, and much fewer games. And third-party development, they limited the amount of games that third-party developers could produce in a year. And of course, a lot of these bigger developers got around it by just setting up shell companies, to release video games under a different name. That's a whole other story. But the entire thing is, Nintendo did actually save the industry. Now we want to go 10 years further ahead. And we want to talk about the Sony PlayStation. So between the time that Nintendo saved the industry in 1995, there have been a lot of other players trying to enter the video game market. The TurboGrafx 16, Atari tried to make a comeback with new hardware, better hardware, same old crappy games though, once again. But the PlayStation was successful. It was wildly successful. In fact, it outsold the Nintendo 64 3-1. And that is almost a miracle when you think about it, that a new player in the video game industry would outsell the Nintendo system, Nintendo being the people who saved the industry just 10 years earlier. They had sold them 3-1. So let's look at how they did that. Basically, they had a system which was inferior in many ways to the Nintendo 64. And, for that matter, to the Sega Saturn. The Nintendo 64 had a better processor. The Sega Saturn had 2 processors in it, about the same strength, the same processing power as the PlayStation. But PlayStation and Sony made it very easy for third-party developers to make games for the PlayStation 1. And they also used CD-ROM, so those games could be bigger and longer. What ended up happening is a lot of third-party developers went with the PlayStation 1. And then we saw a lot of more mature games being produced on it, series like and franchises like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, Twisted Metal, Tomb Raider. All these franchises, these big franchises, basically started on the PlayStation. And then they even stole some of the long-standing franchises that Nintendo had relied on from third-party developers. Most notably, Final Fantasy and all the Square games that came with it. Because Square put out a ton of games for PlayStation, not just Final Fantasy games, but a whole bunch of other ones as well. And of course, they stole Castlevania. And Sony beat Nintendo 3 times over through the use of great games. They just had better games. In fact, Sony would go on to sell their consoles at a loss in the 2000s in order to make up the money in game sales. It was absolutely crazy. Sell a console at a loss, but it was a strategy that worked because they got huge install bases, and because they got huge install bases, they had huge third-party development. So I decided to use some of my analytical skills, and I did a correlation. I did a correlation between the number of sales of a video game system and the number of games available for that system. And I found that there was a correlation, it was about 0.68, and if you don't know what that is, that's a high degree of positive correlation. So that means for every event A happens, 0.68 of event B happens. Now, correlation is not cause and effect. It just gives us an indicator that both are following the same trend. So, for instance, both these things may have the same cause, but the effect is more console sales, more video games available, or more video games available, more console sales. They follow each other. So what does this have to do with Stadia and how it failed? Well, I'm proposing that Stadia's biggest failure was in its games. It only had, after 3 years, it only had 276 games. 276 games, and only 5 of them, 5, were exclusive to Stadia. So in other words, if you had a PlayStation, or if you had an Xbox, there were only 5 games that you couldn't get on your system that were available through Stadia. It's not a compelling reason to move from your current console over to Stadia. It's just not a compelling reason. It's a garbage reason. Now, I know they had other problems. They had other problems like some of their streaming, glitchiness, and things of that nature. But that happens to everybody, and it happens mainly because of the internet connection that you're using as the player, not so much the system itself. So, 5 games that were exclusive, 276 in total. There's no compelling reason there whatsoever to move from your console that you're using now, whether it's PlayStation, Xbox, or even Nintendo, over to Stadia. No reason whatsoever. So I think that's ultimately what killed Stadia. But I do still think the business model is coming back. So in 2014, Microsoft announced that their new Xbox was not going to have any physical media to it. There was not going to be a disk drive in their Xbox. It was a digital-only platform. They faced some backlash, of course. In 2014, I can completely understand that. They faced a lot of backlash, and they eventually ended up providing a disk drive with their system. PlayStation 4 obviously had a disk drive as well, and that wasn't an option. There was no option. Now, with PlayStation 5 and the newest generation of Xbox, we have the Series X, Series S. One is digital only, one has a disk drive, and we have a PlayStation 5 digital only edition, and then we have the one that has the disk drive as well for physical medium. So there is a movement towards digital gaming already, and it's strong. In fact, in 2022, I looked up the stats, and I've got it right here. The Digital Entertainment and Retail Association estimates that 89.5% of all games sold in 2022 were sold digital. 89.5%. When you have 89% or more than 89% of your games being sold digital, that means only less than 11% have physical releases or are being bought through physical medium. So 2014 might have been too early for Microsoft to ditch the physical medium, but it looks like the consumers are getting there now. They're buying more through digital. They're playing more through digital only. They're there. And retailers are also there. The guys from Gaming Off the Grid, another YouTube channel, and one that I watch it a lot, they noticed this, and they've done an actual video on the lack of physical medium in stores. And of course, we had the recent announcement by Walmart that they're just not going to carry physical games anymore. They're going to carry the cards so you can get a download. I don't even know why they bother doing that. You can go on the PlayStation Store, or the Xbox Store, whatever it's called, get those things anyway. So if I were a betting man, I would bet that the next generation of consoles will either be one of two things. It'll be digital only, so PlayStation 6 and Xbox, whatever, will be digital only. Or they will offer a disc version like they did this time, except they will discontinue it after maybe a year. They'll offer it just to say that they did offer it, and then they'll discontinue it, and they'll say it's for lack of interest. People weren't interested in paying the extra $100 or $150 or however much they're going to charge extra for that disk drive. They weren't interested in paying it. We're discontinuing it. Sorry, folks. So this march to digital only, it's well underway. It's here. It's going to be a lock, I'm sure. Within the next few years, that's the way you're going to buy games, except if you go to the pawn shop and buy a game off, from an old game from the pawn shop. That's the way it's going to be. It's all going to be digital. But that's not what Stadia was. So Stadia did have digital purchases for games. But Stadia's big thing was, we're going to stream games. So PlayStation's already there. You can buy a streaming service. You add it on your premium or whatever deluxe editions to the PlayStation Plus, and now you can stream a bunch of games. So Sony and Microsoft are already offering this. But why I think that this is going to be even a bigger push towards that model is I work in the IT industry, as I said. And the IT industry, if you haven't noticed, it's all going to subscription basis. The whole thing. Everything that we sell for software, and I'm not going to tell you what company I'm working for, but everything that we sell for software is on a subscription basis. So we sell to businesses. We don't sell to individual consumers. But individual consumers, whether it's YouTube Premium or Spotify or Netflix, whatever you're consuming media on, it's already subscription basis. But even if you look at things like utility software for your PC, for your laptop, if you want to get WinZip now, you need to pay a subscription for it. You can't buy Microsoft Office and just keep it. Now you have to pay a subscription for it. You pay for it forever. Not once, and then you buy the upgrade when you finally have to. No, you pay every year, period. I've seen accounting software go this way, software like Sage. I'm sure all the enterprise software out there now for businesses is subscription based. So what the industry has found out is that it's way more profitable to charge somebody every year for life for your product than it is for them to buy your product once, install it themselves, or have somebody install it for them, and keep that until the next upgrade comes out. Much, much more profitable. So if that's the case, I don't see why the video game industry wouldn't go in the same direction. So once again, let's say, I'm going to use Sony as an example. So Sony wants to push people in that direction. So maybe their PlayStation Plus in the future, maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the road, is no longer PlayStation Plus, and then you buy the extra tiers to get the free streamed games. Maybe they just consolidate them all and say, you have to buy the streamed games now. And they'll take the edge off it by offering tons of games. Because Sony, let's face it, has thousands of games in their back catalog. They can offer you 500 games and switch out 100 a month. Take out 100 old ones, put in 100 new ones. Whatever ones are on their longest, take those ones out, put 100 new ones in. And then you get them for the next 5 or 6 months. Whatever the timeline needs to be. But the point is, they've got thousands of games, and they could do this, offer you a huge back catalog, and then you could still pay for buying the newest Resident Evil game or whatever the AAA title is that they want to sell you. But eventually even those would go to the streaming. So there's a number of advantages from Sony's perspective for doing this. The first advantage of this is that they get you to pay for their games over and over and over again, forever. Because let's face it, most people want to play online. Most people buy the PS Plus service. So most people will buy the streaming service if they're forced to. So now you're paying for the games over and over and over again, and that makes it much more profitable for new games for Sony. They've already cut out the retailer. They've already cut out distributors. They're doing deals directly with you now. So they're already amassing a huge profit, but this will make it even more profitable for their games. The second reason why is now they get to monetize games that, quite frankly, they sold the game and made the money back ages ago, years ago. Like Twisted Metal 2, Twisted Metal Black. If you want to play Wild Arms 3, pick a game off my shelf behind me. Whatever game, PlayStation 2 games, I got PlayStation 3 games, I got PlayStation 4 games, whatever they are, they will monetize those old games again. So now they get to monetize a game that has no development costs because the development costs have already been paid for, and they've already recouped the money for that by selling the game in the first place. So you've already paid the development costs, and of course they get to monetize that, and they get to monetize that going forward in the future again. So really what we've seen here is the video game industry coming full circle. So at one time, you went to an arcade, and you went with a pocket full of quarters, and you drove those quarters into machines over and over and over again in order to play them. And so those machines were monetized, and they had a revenue stream. You didn't go buy an arcade cabinet, you just played at an arcade. Now, with this new thing, the subscription services, which is where I firmly believe we're headed, with that, they've remonetized and created a revenue stream for every single one of their games again. It's absolutely crazy. So if they're going to do this, one of the things I would hope that they would do is they, being Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, whoever goes in this direction, which I think all three of them will eventually. But if you're going to go in this direction, then I would hope against hope, that you would please charge less for your games. Like I said, you've already cut out the retailer, so you're already taking the retailer's profit. You've already cut out the distributor. You're already with the middleman, the wholesalers. So you're now taking the wholesaler's profit, and you're going to monetize it forever. So please, charge us a little less for the games. Anyway, if you find this kind of content helpful, or if you like this kind of content, then I would really appreciate it if you give me the thumbs up. That's the only real way I know that people like this kind of content. And if you're not a subscriber, it's only one push of a button to you. It means the world to me. And I appreciate all my subscribers. Thank you so much for joining me on another video, and I hope you found this interesting.